Perfection is hard to define, but when you play a game that's truly exceptional, you'll just kind of know because they truly connect with you in a way that almost redefines how you view a game. So today we're going to take a look at 25 near perfect games in no particular order that are nothing short of an unforgettable masterpiece that will stick in your mind and, more importantly, in your heart for years to come. Perfection might be subjective, but if anything else, these are all games that are available on modern platforms that you absolutely need to play at least once because they are just that good. So sit back, relax, and let's have some fun. First up, I have Spider-Man 2018 Remastered, a game that not only exemplifies what a superhero game should feel like, but also a game that redefined what a AAA licensed title should be when done right. It has a completely original story that uses several of the most beloved characters from the Spider-Man universe, and it tells it in a relatable, compelling way. Dare I say, it might actually have an even better story than any of the movies have ever told. What elevates it even more, though, is that it puts you, the player, into the costume of Spider-Man himself. You're not just being told a story, but you, the player, it feels like you are Spider-Man with his multitude of gadgets and as you swing around in New York City. It's a blast to play, and it very well might be one of the best superhero games of all time. Next up, I have Hades, a roguelike experience that caught the gaming world by storm. I myself typically am not a huge fan of roguelike experiences, but Hades is something truly different. You play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, and as you might guess, he's a little bit rebellious. Who would have guessed, right? But he wants to get out from under his father's rule and to escape the underworld. So you pick your choice of weapon and you climb the many floors plagued with enemies to escape his wrath. If you die though, well then of course you'll have to reset and start from the beginning. But that's where Hades is something truly different. It's ironic to say this, but Hades almost rewards the player for dying. Yeah, when you die, you'll actually get another chance to talk to the many characters that you'll meet along your journey, and their stories are truly interesting. Its story is weaved in a way that makes it feel like you're living in a breathing world. It also helps that each run feels completely different depending on how you choose to upgrade your character. Psychonauts to me has always stuck out for its bizarre world, its unique platforming mechanics, and its quirky, albeit charming characters. In Psychonauts 2, they dialed up all of those components even more and developed a truly creative and immersive experience. It's a rare platformer that both excels at its gameplay as well as its story. It can surprisingly be deep at times as you dive into the psyche of different characters to witness their darkest secrets and fears, but it still always remains lighthearted in how it conveys its story. Psychonauts 2 might not necessarily be the most popular game on this list, but perfection isn't really about sales numbers, it's about quality, and there's very few games that stands toe-to-toe with just how good this game is. It's kind of crazy to think that Skyrim is still insanely popular, well over a decade after its initial release, despite it being a single-player game. This is an open-world RPG that launched way back during the PS360 generation, and it's lived on in the hearts of gamers ever since, and for a very, very good reason. There's an adventure to be had around every corner, and it won't take you long before you get lost into its sprawling world thanks to its wide variety of interesting quests that you can take at any moment. And like a lot of other games, its side quests can actually be just as good as the main quest line. And that's because Bethesda managed to make a world that's truly immersive. Even all of these years later, Skyrim still has one of the most well-realized open worlds in video games, and thanks to the modding community especially, there's always something new to discover if you want to try something new. The entire Persona franchise could easily sit on a list of the greatest JRPGs ever made. Their turn-based combat, their memorable characters, their compelling mysteries, their beautiful music, and their stylized visuals catapults them into a realm of their own. There's very few franchises that has consistently been as good as the Persona series. In fact, Persona 4 Golden is actually my own personal favorite in the franchise, but I'd still say that Persona 5 Royal is the easiest to recommend. With its massive improvement to its visuals and dungeon design, it elevates the experience just that much more for new players. It's a truly remarkable experience that engulfs you into its story and into its world. You play the role of a high school student that discovers a demon parallel world that impacts the human world. Now you're faced with changing the heart of some truly warped individuals. It's a compelling story aided by the fact that you feel like you're a part of its world thanks to how its social mechanics work. Now, if you like more of a fantasy setting, however, maybe go and check out Metaphor ReFantazio, which is just as good, and it's made by the same studio, being Atlus. Mario is easily the most recognized video game character ever made, appearing in more than 100 different games in a span of more than 30 years. And I can point to a number of great Mario entries, but anytime we get a new Mario 3D platformer, you just kind of know that you're in for a real treat. Nintendo defined this genre back in the 90s, and somehow they keep raising the bar again and again and again. Well, Super Mario Odyssey is no different. The idea that Mario's cap has now come to life and he can use it to transfer his body to other creatures and objects is nothing short of brilliant. You can become a Goomba, a frog, and a dinosaur among various other surprises. It's creative and it always keeps its gameplay fresh as you hunt down 1,000 moons throughout its well-designed world. If anything else, this will be a game that's played for generations to come, as it will remain as one of the best the 3D platforming genre has ever seen. Now, speaking of Nintendo, Metroid Prime is one of the most brilliantly designed games ever made. It's a first-person Metroidvania that completely transports you into a mysterious alien world where there's a ton of secrets to uncover as you peel back the layers of its interconnected universe. Now, you'll need to pay close attention to every nook and cranny as you traverse its labyrinth-like world, because there's a good chance that it will become important later on as you unlock new abilities that allows you to reach new locations. It's actually quite amazing how they managed to pack just so much content into its world. And I mean, I really do believe its level design is still second to none. Even better is that its new remaster elevates it even more with new state-of-the-art visuals and quality of life improvements such as better camera control. Now this already perfect masterpiece just got that much better. Hey, maybe it's a rare 11 out of 10 instead of just 10 out of 10. One of the most heart-wrenching games of all time is The Last of Us Part 1. It begs the question of what's right and what's wrong, and it's beautifully written into a complex story about flawed characters. It's also set in a somewhat realistic universe, and like a lot of other zombie games, Naughty Dog put the human race in what feels like a realistic situation thanks to its real-life fungal virus that affects other insect species, and now it has somehow crossed over to humans in The Last of Us. It adds an extra layer of horror to its already messed up world. I also then have to applaud its gritty combat, and you can tell that was one of their main goals. They wanted to tell a realistic story, which also included its gameplay. It all just combines perfectly together. If anything else, though, The Last of Us Part 1 has one of the most emotionally charged stories ever created. Sony finally gave Team Asobi a real opportunity to showcase their talent with a more traditional PlayStation release. That means no more niche VR titles and not just another tech demo that comes along with PlayStation hardware. Instead, they gave them a legitimate budget to make a 3D platformer, and Team Asobi absolutely ran with their opportunity, and they knocked it out of the park. Astrobot is a true love letter to PlayStation's history, and it oozes charm as you run into a multitude of bots that cosplay as iconic characters that's appeared on PlayStation hardware in the past. I mean, you'll smile every single time that you see one of your favorite characters show up in Astrobot. In fact, there's actually even a few levels where you play as one of these beloved characters, and I mean, these are truly, truly special experiences in gaming. Astrobot has quickly become a fan favorite in my household, and I fully expect it to reach a younger generation of gamers because it is a masterpiece that the entire family can enjoy. It's been over a decade, and I can still remember the first time I ever saw Ori and the Blind Forest. Xbox dimmed the lights on their E3 stage and cued its music made by Gareth Coker. It was one of the most beautiful and emotional trailers that I'd ever seen. The music was perfect, the setting was perfect, the art was mesmerizing, and its characters truly had me invested in just the short snippet that they showed. I knew right away that this was going to be a truly special game, and I was absolutely correct. The modern market may have since been flooded by Metroidvanias, but even all of these years later, the Ori series remains a staple within this genre. It doesn't emulate anything else. It does its own thing by putting more focus on its platforming, all while still having rewarding combat. Some of its boss sequences are some of the most memorable platforming sections that I've ever played, and all of this is aided by a truly beautiful story that anybody would be invested in. In a world of microtransactions and DLC to elongate the life cycle of games, Larian Studios dared to do something different. They released a content-rich and a complete experience on day one with the launch of Baldur's Gate 3. Who would have guessed? Gamers like that. Now, they have continued to improve it post-release, but it's always been a complete experience, and you can absolutely tell that this is a studio that truly cares about games. It's filled with a ton of player choice, it has a rewarding turn-based combat system, an engrossing story, and captivating characters. It's a tailor-made experience that you, the player, chooses, and it won't take long before it blows you away with just how immersive its story and world can be. Shadow of the Colossus is a great example of why games can be art. It's a game that's captivated the imagination of gamers for more than 2 decades. And with its remake for the PlayStation 4, it's more stunning than ever with its awe-inspiring scope and vast world. I mean, the first time you see one of its colossal giants in the distance, you'll just kind of be mesmerized by their ferocious beauty. You'll immediately know that it's a hunt to remember. What really just blew me away about this game, though, is in just how it conveys its emotion on the player. It's a simple, albeit heartbreaking tale the more that it unfolds. I mean, if there was ever a story in gaming that I could call art, it would be Shadow of the Colossus. It's a game with few words, but it also somehow manages to be one of the more memorable stories ever crafted. It's still one of my favorite stories in gaming, all while being one of the most unique games in terms of its gameplay. Once upon a time, BioWare was a truly great studio that knew how to make great games. In fact, they knew how to make excellent games, and the original Mass Effect trilogy exemplifies that with its immersive storytelling through its player choice. When you first start out on your adventure, you'll choose one of its 2 pre-made characters, female or male, or you can create your own. After that, you'll use that character for a story that spans across 3 games, and it will completely be your own. You, the player, will make the choices that will impact the entire universe, and you will form relationships with various memorable characters that you'll truly connect with across its 3 games. And while it may have stumbled a bit on its ending, it's colorful, and I'll just leave it at that, but it's still an unforgettable experience because it's the journey that's truly special. This is not only among the greatest trilogies ever made, but I also believe it's among the best sci-fi dramas of all time. Hazelight has quickly cemented themselves as an all-time great cooperative-driven studio. Their unique approach to cooperative games includes compelling stories, a large dash of creativity, and required split screen where each player assumes the role of a different character in an asynchronous type of gameplay. The primary theme, though, remains consistent. You have to work together to complete your goals, hence the name of their masterpiece, It Takes Two. In this game, you play as a troubled married couple turned to dolls, and in order to return to form, these two have to learn to stop bickering and to work together in some of the most creatively designed levels that I've ever seen in any type of game ever made. On the surface, I could easily say that It Takes Two is a 3D platformer, but the truth is, this game is just so much more than that. Each level brings forth a completely new idea that completely transforms its genre and how you play the game. It's brilliant, it's creative, it's unique, and yeah, it's truly special. This is easily among the best cooperative games ever made, thanks to its gameplay and also because of its touching story. Valve is one of those studios that has such a good pedigree that it's almost a little bit frustrating because they simply can't count to 3. Thankfully, though, they've almost kind of made up for that by perfecting the number 2. I'll tell you this right now, they don't play around when it comes to sequels because, wow, Portal 2 is nothing short of a perfect masterpiece. Its unique blend of platforming, puzzle solving, and charming humor makes for one of the most memorable experiences that I've ever had the privilege to play in gaming. There really is nothing quite like Portal and its rat-like experience, and that's immediately transparent when you boot up the game and get chastised for practically everything that you do by the most charming, albeit passive-aggressive robots that you'll ever meet. I mean, this is a game that keeps you smiling from ear to ear from beginning to end, all while testing your brain with cleverly designed puzzles that uses portals and a variety of weird, gooey substances. Yeah, we don't ask a lot other than, is the cake really a lie? There's been a lot of historical franchises that runs into an identity crisis at some point or another. They find themselves become stagnant because what used to be popular might not necessarily be in the modern era of games. So they either have to change their identity or to march out the same old formula to less success. Well, Sony somehow avoided an identity crisis for God of War by giving Kratos a midlife crisis. He's much older now and he has a kid. So what used to be a ferocious god killer has since been turned into the dad of war. And that might sound a little goofy on the surface, but this actually turned out to be a brilliant decision. Kratos is so much more relatable than what he was throughout the original trilogy. And this makes for one of the most satisfying stories in all of gaming. They even changed his iconic combat from the Chains of Olympus to a more Thor-like axe. And again, somehow, this turned out to be another satisfying, brilliant decision. If anything else, God of War 2018 is one of the most perfect single-player experiences thanks to its story, its characters, its visuals, and because of its gratifying combat. One of my favorite stories in all of gaming is Final Fantasy VII. I mean, if you want a good story set in a fascinating world with some of the best characters ever created, then Final Fantasy VII is your game. There's a reason that so many gamers have cherished this specific title for decades, and they will continue to do so for decades to come because it's a timeless tale that will forever be good. In some ways, I'll even say that it's transcended its very own era, and even more so now that Square Enix is remaking them in 3 parts. They've taken it upon themselves to expand their beloved characters even more, though I will say that the remakes are almost a sequel in disguise. Now, thankfully though, whether you want to play the original title or the newer ones, they're both available on modern platforms, and they are both perfectly executed. Nier Automata is one of the most uniquely beautiful crafted games to ever be made. From its music, to its world, to its gameplay, to its narrative, and to its characters. It's all just so breathtaking in combination of one another. It's set in a futuristic post-apocalyptic world about man-made androids versus alien machines, and its story is nothing short of thought-provoking as you reflect on human emotions, despair, and what it means to be human. At first, it might come off as just a little bit strange, but its unraveling story that takes multiple playthroughs to complete quickly becomes one of the greatest stories to ever be told. This is only elevated even more through its diverse and dynamic gameplay that changes on the fly. It's a hack and slash game at one moment, and then a shoot 'em up at the very next. It's always a blast to play though, and it adds to its unique approach. I've never really played a game quite like Nier, and I've certainly played very few games that are even remotely as special as this just absolute masterpiece. Resident Evil 4 is the result of a striking blend of what happens when you perfect action gameplay with survival horror elements. This allowed Capcom to reach an even broader audience than what they had in previous games, and wow, did they pull it off. You play the role of Leon Kennedy, and he's tasked to save the president's daughter, who's being held captive by, we'll just kind of call them interesting individuals. They share a lot in common with what you would consider a zombie, and this sparks a compelling mystery for their cult-like behavior. It continues the great overarching narrative that Resident Evil was known for, but Resident Evil 4 goes above and beyond when it comes to its great characters, its well-executed story, and its rewarding gameplay. It brilliantly blends its survival horror elements as you hunt down limited resources to keep you well prepared to deal with the many threats, which includes memorable boss sequences that you'll run into throughout its 15-plus hour playthrough. So whether it's because of its story or its gameplay, Resident Evil 4 is an all-time classic made even better thanks to its remake. Red Dead Redemption 2 is so flawlessly executed that I don't even think it's subjective by this point. It's a nearly perfect game in every major aspect. Its expansive world is so finely crafted that it feels like you, the player, are a part of the Wild Wild West. It's difficult to create an open world and to actually make it interesting, but Rockstar once again has proven why they're the masters of open world design. Every small detail, from its animations to the main character's beard and how it grows, were carefully and intricately fine-tuned to create an experience that inserts you, the player, into its world in the most immersive way possible. Then there's its characters and its story, and this is what truly blew me away. Sure, I could gush over its many aspects, including its endless world, its gameplay, or even its animations, but then there's its story and its complex characters, and these help truly bring it to life in a way that we've seen in very few games ever. Perfection might be impossible, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is debatably the closest that we'll ever see to perfection in a video game. Next up here, and I mean, we all knew that Zelda was going to appear somewhere on this list. For decades, Zelda has been wowing fans with generational type of experiences. Whether it be on the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, the Wii, the Wii U, or the Switch, every Zelda experience has something truly special to offer. Now, I can make an entire video about my favorite Zelda games ever because they're all just so good. But what I'll kind of say here is that even though I do prefer the more classic formula that prioritizes dungeons, however, the newer entries being Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom offer something truly special in their own way. They have rich open worlds that begs to be explored, and they encourage the player to be creative with its new tools. So regardless if you like the new school experience or old school, both types of experiences are just some of the best games that you can play, hands down. The Witcher 3 very well might be one of the most masterful RPGs ever made. Its rich world, engaging combat, and its player choice-driven story makes for a remarkable experience like no other. Every choice feels weighty with actual consequence. That's something that a lot of games struggle with, but in this game, the consequences ripples throughout its story that's filled with likable, memorable characters. Even its side quests and DLC expansions are masterful at what they do, and so much so that they very well might actually be better than full games made by other companies. Now, I will go ahead and throw a bonus on here as well. If you prefer futuristic worlds as opposed to fantasy, then Cyberpunk 2077 is also another amazing experience made by the same developer, and everything that I just said about The Witcher could actually apply to Cyberpunk as well. Either way, both these games could be described as near perfect. Back in 2006, I was blown away by Gears of War. I knew nothing about this game other than seeing its Mad World advertisement on TV, and it immediately struck a chord with me. That is still, hands down, the best game ad that I have ever seen, and it actually convinced me to go out to buy this game and its limited edition option. And I'm so happy that I did, because I immediately fell in love with its world, its characters, and its gameplay. It has this dark apocalyptic story about the human species trying to simply survive after being ravaged by these terrible monsters. They're now fighting back with these really creative weapons, and the story is actually really interesting. I think the characters and their back and forth quips elevates their camaraderie. It really kind of makes you want to fight for each other, which is important because this is also a really good cooperative game. And that's the thing about Gears of War. It's the gameplay that I think truly separates Gears of War from everything else. Gears of War is really what popularized cover-based third-person shooting, but to this day, I still don't think that there's a game that does it better, and that's why Gears of War is great in every single category, whether that be its single-player, its competitive multiplayer, or even when it comes to co-op. Gears of War is still a one-of-a-kind experience. So if you haven't played the original, definitely play its remake, Gears of War Ultimate Edition. Now, just like Gears of War, Uncharted blew me away when I first played it back on the PS3. Now, thankfully, you can play the entire franchise on the PS4 and the PS5, and in fact, this is one franchise that I go back to and play every few years just because it's that good. Uncharted 1 through 4 legitimately have some of the best stories in all of gaming, and a big part of that is its characters. Whether that be Nathan Drake or his companions, they're all relatable, they're all charming, and they bounce off each other just so perfectly. If anything else, the Uncharted series is a staple for story-driven experiences and cinematic set pieces, to the point that this series completely changed gaming. Maybe that's for better or worse, but this is the franchise that took gaming stories to a whole new level and put them on par with how people view movies. Now, lastly here, and I don't think this should come off as a big surprise, but I'm going to go ahead and go with pretty much the entire Soulsborne franchise, including Sekiro. From Software has truly proven themselves as an exceptional studio that challenges its players. Whether that be Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, or Elden Ring, all of these games are nearly perfect at what they do. In fact, they formed their own genre, and now we have countless other Souls-likes from other companies. But still, none as good as the originals. FromSoft is truly special and separates themselves from all of the competition. And I will kind of say this much, I think Elden Ring is their magnum opus. As much as I love all of these other games, they took the Souls-like formula and they inserted it into a sprawling open world that could be played for decades to come. Because unlike other open worlds, this one feels so finely tuned with something to discover seemingly around every corner. Truly, this is one of the best designed games ever made. It's one of the most rewarding games ever made, and it's just one of the best games ever made, period. From Software is in a tier of their own. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, but if I didn't mention one of your favorites, do make sure to let me know in the comments below. But until next time, subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.